So when you're building your supply chain, we have to look at the extent of integration. So what kind of relationship are you going to have with your suppliers? Are you going to own them or are you going to partner with someone? We looked at logistics. So what are the costs of moving your partially created inventory, your work in process, your raw materials between parts of your supply chain? We talked about the different types of technology you could use as part of your supply chain. And the last thing we want to look at is how do you choose a supplier? So as you look at who could be a supplier in your supply chain, you need to analyze the supplier. So there's a number of things to consider as you analyze a company as being a possible supplier in your chain. And the first is the quality of the company. So what kind of quality management program do they have? How will they assure defects before they happen? Because if there's issues with quality in your suppliers, there's going to be issues of quality for your company, and it's going to impact your relationship with your customers. So you need to look at what the company is doing in terms of quality assurance. We also have to look at the flexibility of the company. How are they in terms of being able to adapt to changes that your company might have? So if you ask for a different amount of orders, if you want to vary the product a bit, how accommodating or flexible can they be for that? You need to consider their location. So if we look at Nissan, for example, so let's just go to a news article here. With England doing Brexit, so leaving the European Union, this has created a number of problems for companies and their supply chains. There are a number of companies that chose to live or work or be located in the United Kingdom so they would have access to the European Union. But if England is leaving the European Union, the problem is those companies, they no longer have access to the European Union by being located in England. So companies like Nissan, for example, have warned that they may leave England and go to other countries within the European Union. So you have to consider the location of your suppliers. And we choose parts of our supply chain based on their location to give us access to markets. And you need to have suppliers who are in a location so that you can get your orders within a reasonable amount of time. So you have to consider where they're located. Of course, you also want to consider the price. How much does it cost them to make the materials that you need, and what price are they charging you? You need to consider their reputation and their stability. Are they going to exist a year from now, 2 years from now? As you look at your supplier, you have to consider what kind of length of contract are we looking at? Is it short-term or long-term? And so as you look at the supplier and analyze their reputation and their stability, you have to consider, are we looking for a long-term relationship? In which case we need a highly reputable and highly stable company that can still be our partner a decade from now. We need to have low enough lead times and reliability. So in an earlier video, we looked at the issue with the pine tree seed cakes and co-op, and the issues that the lack of reliability and high lead times were having on co-op and their customers, and how this was leading to big purchases and then long periods of time with no purchases and this instability in demand. So creating a bullwhip effect because they had high lead times and a lack of reliability. So you don't want to choose a supplier that will add cost to your business by creating a bullwhip effect for you and the members of your supply chain. What other customers does your supplier have, right? Is your competitor also a customer from your supplier? Does your competitor own that supplier? So remember, if you're going to be sharing information with your supplier, you need to know who else they have relationships with. And is it a risk to your company to share proprietary information or information about the cost the number of orders, inventory. Is that an issue of sharing that information with your supplier based on who their other customers are? You also need to consider the service after the sale. So your supplier, what if there's issues with the materials they send you? How responsive are they in terms of replacing defective materials, and how will they work with you in terms of fixing any issues that arise? So we need to analyze the supplier in terms of quality, flexibility, location, price, reputation, reliability, who their customers are, and service after the sale. We should also look at their certifications. So this is where we would look and see if they were an ISO 9001 member. And remember, ISO 9001 is often a criteria to do business with companies internationally. And so as you get a longer supply chain because of globalization, we're often looking for companies and whether or not they follow ISO 9001. So these are telling us about their quality. We have HACCP. If you were involved in production, distribution of food products, you want to look for suppliers who are HACCP compliant. You also want to look whether a company is a Six Sigma company, and this would be for any type of large production. So if we look at continuous production or repetitive large production. So all of these are telling you about the level of quality. As you choose your supplier, you have to think about the length of the contract that you're going to have with them. Is this a short-term arrangement, or is this a long-term arrangement? The length of the contract and the number of suppliers you're going to choose are going to impact the amount and level of info sharing. So if we look at Toyota, for example, Toyota is looking for long-term partners. And so when Toyota finds a supplier in their new Austin campus that they've built, they actually move the supplier on campus with them. So the supplier is actually in the building next door to Toyota's manufacturing. And Toyota's thought process is that their suppliers are long-term relationships. So they want to make sure their suppliers are successful and stay in business for decades because they plan to be working with them long-term. So there's a very close relationship between the supplier and Toyota, and that means a high level of information sharing. So that means that the supplier can essentially be involved in Toyota design. They can walk the operations floor. They're very closely integrated. Now, when you're looking at that level of information sharing, you also have to consider how many suppliers you're going to have. Are you going to have multiple suppliers? The benefit of multiple suppliers is that if something happens at one location, so let's suppose that you have two companies that make microchips for your cell phones. Well, if one company has a fire at their factory or is unable to help us meet the demand for our new phone, then we have the other supplier that will pick up the slack. If you have a single supplier and something happens with their production, maybe they're having quality issues and they can't get the microchips to work properly, then that hurts your overall business. On the other hand, the more suppliers you have, the more difficult it is to share large amounts of information. When you have a small number of suppliers that you're in long-term relations with, then sharing all your information about orders, operations, is much more easy to do and less risky. The more suppliers, the more information sharing, there is a risk to the company that their suppliers will take that information and take it elsewhere. So why would we choose a supply chain? Why would we, as we talk about, we need to decide the level of the relationship and who the suppliers are going to be and how we're going to move inventory between the parts of our supply chain. Why would we have a supply chain at all? Well, you have a supply chain to help you reduce costs, right? We want to reduce the cost of making our product by outsourcing it to someone who has more expertise or can do it more efficiently. We want to reduce our inventory costs, not have to store as much on hand because we're doing risk pooling. So we're wanting to share some of the costs with the other parts of our supply chain. We want to reduce the cost of making purchases, right? So we want to have a relationship with a supplier who can provide what we need and do that at a reduced cost. We want to be able to improve product design, right? So we talked about how the quality at the factory impacts the quality when you sell it to the customer. And so now you have a team with expertise from different companies working together to give you a better design product, better quality product. And by having a coordinated supply chain, you should be able to reduce your transportation costs, reduce your inventory costs, and get the time to market sooner. As we look at examples of some of these, now let's look at the example of Celestial Seasonings. Let me just take you to their website here. All right, so Celestial Seasonings is a tea company, and here you can see a number of their teas, and they're located in Boulder, Colorado. Okay, so when we look at the supply chain for Celestial Seasonings, they have tea that comes from China and Ecuador. Their mint tea comes from Washington State. So they have a supply chain that spans the globe. Well, when we look at the costs and the reasons to have a supply chain, so let's go back to our list. The benefit of having a supply chain, having a relationship with these companies in China and Ecuador and Washington State, is that you can have standing orders for your raw materials. So every couple months, we're going to need this amount of mint. Every couple months, we're going to need this amount of green tea. So there's less cost to making purchases when you have a relationship with a supplier. We can also produce with economies of scale. So the more we produce, the lower the per unit cost. So we're going to reduce the production cost there and reduce the time to market. So the thing with mint tea is mint tea must be processed, so gone from tea leaves to be ground up and sold within 4 months. So we can't have mint tea just sitting around. So we need to reduce the time to market. Well, how can we reduce the time to market? Well, if we work with a supplier to get us the tea, and then we turn it into tea leaves, we work with a distributor to get that tea to market, we can speed up the time and maintain the freshness of our product. We also can reduce the inventory cost because we don't have to hold our tea in storage. We can move it on to other parts of our supply chain. So if you look at Celestial Seasonings, for example, when it comes to storing their product, they have to store the herbal tea and the mint tea in completely separate rooms. Because if you store the mint tea in the same room as the herbal teas, all the herbal teas will just taste like mint. The mint is pervasive and it takes over everything. So we want to reduce the amount of time that we hold the mint because that's very costly to have to create a whole separate area simply for mint tea. So we want to reduce the time to market and reduce that holding costs of it. When it comes to making tea, Celestial Seasonings makes decaffeinated tea. But they can't do that the way they want to in North America. So the process that Celestial Seasonings uses for making decaffeinated tea is they use what's called a supercritical fluid extraction. So if you use high pressure chambers of CO2, the caffeine will just crystallize out. Now this method is not available in North America because no one has the facilities to do so. Other companies that make decaffeinated tea in North America, what they do is they soak the leaves in methylene chloride. Okay, and methylene chloride itself is toxic, so that's washed off the leaves when it's done. But you're using a method that Celestial Seasonings considers to be an unhealthy method to decaffeinate the tea. So they don't want to do that. They don't want to use any toxic chemicals. So instead, decaffeinated tea for Celestial Seasonings is done in Germany. Okay, so by coordinating their production with parts of their supply chain, they can improve the design of the product and improve the quality of the product. So they don't have to use any chemicals to make it decaffeinated. So you can see how having a supply chain, having companies involved to buy your materials from and to sell your product to can help reduce cost of your purchases, transportation costs, production costs, get you faster to market, reduce that inventory cost, and improve the quality and design of your product.